The ground shook like an earthquake when the massive ship crashed into the Nevada desert. Captain Jake Sullivan felt the tremor through his boots, even though he stood 50 miles away at the military base. The night sky lit up with strange colors, as something huge fell from the stars, leaving a trail of fire and smoke behind it. Radio chatter filled the air as soldiers and pilots tried to understand what they had just witnessed. Nobody had ever seen anything like this before. Jake grabbed his gear and called his team together. Marine Lieutenant Ben Carter ran up with his rifle ready, sweat already forming on his face despite the cool desert air. Engineer Amy Richardson checked her equipment twice, making sure her scanners and tools were working properly. Dr. Lisa Martinez arrived last, carrying her medical kit and looking both excited and nervous about what they might find out there in the sand. The helicopter ride to the crash site took 30 minutes, but it felt like hours. Jake stared out the window at the massive crater ahead of them, steam still rising from the sand where something impossibly large had hit the earth. The ship stretched for miles across the desert floor, its dark metal surface reflecting the morning sun in ways that hurt to look at directly. Strange symbols covered the hull, and parts of the vessel still glowed with an eerie blue light that made everyone feel uneasy. They landed a safe distance away and approached on foot. Amy held her radiation detector in front of her, watching the numbers carefully as they got closer to the wreckage. The readings stayed normal, which surprised everyone since the ship clearly used technology far beyond anything humans had ever built. Ben kept his weapon ready while scanning the area for any signs of movement or danger. The first thing they noticed was the smell. It was not the usual scent of burning metal or fuel that came from normal crashes. This was something different, almost sweet but with an underlying bitterness that made their stomachs turn. Lisa pulled out her medical scanner and started taking readings of the air around them, frowning at the results she was getting. They found an opening in the hull where the metal had been torn apart during the crash. Jake led the way inside, using his flashlight to see in the darkness beyond. The corridors were too tall for humans, built for creatures that must have been at least 8 feet in height. Strange panels lined the walls, some still flickering, with that same blue light they had seen from outside. Ben discovered the first body in what looked like a command center. The alien was tall and thin, with 4 arms and skin that looked like it was made of tiny scales. Its large eyes were closed, and Lisa could see that it had died from wounds that looked like they came from some kind of energy weapon. She carefully examined the creature, while Amy studied the technology around them. The control panels were covered in symbols that meant nothing to human eyes, but Amy could tell they were dealing with systems far more advanced than anything on Earth. She carefully scanned everything with her equipment, taking pictures and measurements that might help scientists back home understand what they were looking at. The level of technology was breathtaking and terrifying at the same time. Jake found more bodies as they explored deeper into the ship. All of them showed signs of battle damage, but Lisa noticed something else that worried her. Many of the aliens had wounds that looked self-inflicted, as if they had been trying to destroy something before they died. She pointed this out to the others, and they all felt a chill run down their spines. In the deepest part of the ship, Ben found what looked like storage areas filled with small crystalline objects that pulsed with inner light. Amy scanned them carefully and discovered they were some kind of data storage devices, containing more information than all the computers on Earth combined. The aliens had tried to destroy these crystals before they died, but some had survived the attempt. Lisa made another disturbing discovery when she examined the ship's hull from the inside. The damage pattern showed that this vessel had been in a fierce battle with weapons that could cut through metal like it was paper. But the strangest part was that the aliens had deliberately crashed their ship rather than let it fall into enemy hands. They had chosen to die on Earth rather than let someone else have their technology. Amy found evidence that the ship's power core had been sabotaged by its own crew. They had tried to create an explosion that would destroy everything, but the crash had interrupted their plan before they could complete it. The aliens had been desperate to prevent their technology from being captured, which raised uncomfortable questions about what they had been running from. As the team prepared to leave and report their findings, Jake took one last look around. The alien command center. Whatever these creatures were, they had been advanced enough to travel between stars, but had still lost a battle so badly that they chose death over capture. He wondered what kind of enemy could frighten such advanced beings so much that they would make such a desperate choice. The answer to that question would change everything for humanity. 6 months had passed since the crash, and Dr. Alex Murphy still spent most of his time staring at alien symbols that hurt his eyes. The linguist had been working day and night with computer specialist Kate Williams to crack the code hidden in those crystal data cores. Their office was filled with screens showing thousands of alien characters, mathematical formulas, and translation attempts that never seemed to work right. Kate rubbed her tired eyes and pointed at her main computer. Screen! She had been running programs for weeks, trying every possible combination and pattern she could think of. The alien language was unlike anything humans had ever encountered, built on concepts that seemed to ignore the basic rules of how communication was supposed to work. Just when they thought they understood one symbol, it would change meaning depending on what symbols came before and after it. Commander Ryan Brooks visited their lab every day, looking more worried each time. The military wanted answers about the aliens and their technology, but Alex and Kate could only give him theories and guesses. They knew the crystals contained massive amounts of information, but unlocking it was like trying to solve a puzzle where half the pieces kept changing shape. The breakthrough came when Kate realized that the alien language was not just written words, but also contained mathematical and emotional components mixed together. She wrote a new program that could separate these different layers of meaning, and suddenly the symbols began to make sense. Alex felt his heart racing as the first real alien sentences appeared on their screens. What they found made their blood run cold. The aliens called themselves the Corvani, and they had been part of something called the Galactic Federation. But their records told a story of horror and destruction that stretched across hundreds of star systems. An empire known as the Zealoth. Dominion was conquering everything in its path, treating other species like resources to be harvested rather than intelligent beings to be respected. Kate translated file after file, each one worse than the last. The Zealoth were cybernetically enhanced creatures who stripped entire worlds bare of resources and enslaved any populations they found useful. They had been expanding across the galaxy for thousands of years, leaving nothing but dead worlds and broken civilizations behind them. The Corvani Federation had been their latest target. Alex found records of desperate battles where entire fleets had been destroyed trying to stop the Zealoth advance. The enemy used weapons that could tear through any defense the Federation had developed, and their tactics showed no mercy for civilians or surrendering forces. World after world fell to their relentless expansion, with billions of beings either killed or enslaved. Commander Brooks read the translations with growing horror. The files contained detailed star charts showing the Zealoth expansion pattern, and Earth was directly in their path. According to the alien calculations, humanity had perhaps 5 years before the Dominion arrived in force to claim their new conquest. The Corvani ship had not crashed on Earth by accident, but had been trying to reach the planet to deliver a warning. Kate discovered personal logs from the Corvani crew that painted an even darker picture. The ship's captain had watched his home world burn as Zealoth forces harvested its resources and enslaved its population. His ship had been part of a desperate rearguard action, trying to buy time for other species to evacuate or prepare defenses. They had chosen to crash on Earth rather than let their technology fall into Zealoth hands. Dr. Lisa Martinez was called in to review the biological data about the Zeloth themselves. What she found disturbed her more than anything else in the files. The Zeloth had once been a normal species like any other, but they had replaced most of their bodies with mechanical parts that made them stronger and more ruthless. They no longer felt emotions like compassion or mercy, viewing other beings as nothing more than tools to be used or obstacles to be removed. The files showed that the Zeloth had a rigid hierarchy based on cybernetic enhancement levels. The more of their original bodies they replaced with machines, the higher their rank in the Dominion. Their leaders were barely recognizable as living creatures anymore, having traded away almost everything that made them alive in exchange for power and longevity. Alex found tactical reports that showed how the Zeloth conquered new worlds. They would arrive with massive fleets and immediately target population centers and government facilities. Any resistance was crushed with overwhelming force, and survivors were sorted into categories based on their usefulness. The strong became slaves for mining and construction work, while those with technical skills were forced to help maintain Zeloth technology. What made the situation even worse was that the Zeloth had learned to use conquered species against each other. They would promise better treatment to those who helped them control other prisoners, creating a system where the enslaved policed themselves. This broke the spirit of resistance and made organized rebellion almost impossible. Kate discovered communication logs between Corvani ships during their final battle. The crews had known they were going to die, but they kept fighting anyway, hoping to delay the Zeloth advance long enough for others to escape. Their sacrifice had bought precious time for the evacuation of several worlds, but it had not been enough to stop the Dominion's relentless expansion. Commander Brooks called an emergency meeting with the highest levels of government and military leadership. The translations were classified at the highest possible level, but plans began immediately for sharing this information with other nations. Humanity would need to unite like never before if they were going to have any chance of surviving what was coming. The most chilling discovery was in the final log entry from the Corvani captain. He had written that their ship contained enough technology to potentially help humanity defend itself, but only if humans could learn to use it properly. The Corvani had been peaceful explorers and traders, not warriors, and their defensive approach had not been enough against Zeloth aggression. Perhaps a more violent species like humanity might find better ways to use their technology. Dr. Elena Vasquez never thought she would be leading the most important scientific project in human history, but here she was, standing in a laboratory built around pieces of alien technology that still made her nervous. Project Phoenix had brought together the brightest minds from every nation on Earth, all working toward the same desperate goal of understanding Corvani technology before the Zeloth arrived. General Carl Peterson walked through the facility every morning, checking on progress. That seemed to move far too slowly for comfort. The military man understood weapons and tactics, but the science involved in making alien technology work for humans was beyond his experience. He relied on Elena and her team to find solutions that might keep humanity from becoming another conquered species in the Zeloth Empire. Physicist Dr. Greg Thompson had been studying the Corvani power systems for months, and his discoveries both amazed and frustrated him. The aliens used something they called quantum tunnel drives that could manipulate space itself, allowing their ships to travel faster than light without the massive energy requirements that human theories predicted. The problem was that human brains seemed to work differently from Corvani minds, making their control systems nearly impossible to operate. Engineer Sam Davis worked alongside Greg, trying to understand how Corvani weapons functioned. The plasma cannons they had found could punch through any armor humans had ever developed, and their energy shields could stop attacks that would destroy entire city blocks. But the weapons were designed with Corvani psychology in mind, built for defensive warfare rather than the aggressive tactics that humans preferred. The most dangerous work was being done by cybernetics expert Nina Foster, who was developing ways for humans to interface directly with alien technology. The Corvani had used biological neural connections that were completely different from human brain structure, and early attempts to adapt their systems had nearly killed several volunteer test subjects. Nina had to find ways to bridge the gap between alien and human minds without destroying either in the process. Pilot Claire Johnson had volunteered for the most risky experiments, allowing Nina to test neural interface prototypes directly on her brain. Claire was one of the best pilots in the Air Force, with reflexes and spatial reasoning that made her ideal for the dangerous work of learning to fly alien ships. Each test session left her exhausted and disoriented, but she kept coming back because she understood what was at stake. The breakthrough came when Greg realized that human brains process the quantum calculations differently than Corvani minds. Where the aliens had been cautious and methodical, human intuition allowed for more creative and aggressive applications of the technology. Claire discovered that she could push the alien systems far beyond their original design limits, achieving performance levels that would have terrified the peaceful Corvani. Dr. Lisa Martinez continued her biological research, studying how Corvani physiology had influenced their technology design. The aliens had been naturally cautious creatures, preferring to avoid conflict rather than engage in warfare. Their ships were built like mobile cities, designed to protect large populations. During long journeys between stars, humans would need to completely rethink how to use such technology for military purposes. Sam made the first major weapons breakthrough when he figured out how to modify Corvani plasma cannons for human use. The original weapons had been designed to disable enemy ships without causing unnecessary destruction, but Sam found ways to increase their power output dramatically. The modified weapons could slice through any known material, making them perfect for the kind of aggressive tactics that might work against Zeloth forces. Nina achieved her own breakthrough when she developed neural interfaces that could adapt to human brain patterns. The key was not trying to make humans think like Corvani, but instead creating translation systems that could convert human thoughts into commands the alien technology could understand. Claire was the first to successfully pilot a recovered Corvani fighter using the new interface, and her performance exceeded all expectations. The work was not without its dangers and failures. Several test pilots died when experimental systems overloaded their nervous systems, and multiple pieces of alien technology were destroyed when humans pushed them beyond their safety limits. Elena had to balance the need for rapid progress against the lives of the people working on the project, knowing that every delay brought the Zeloth closer to Earth. Greg discovered that Corvani energy shields could be modified to work with human power systems, but the process required completely rebuilding the underlying technology. The aliens had used biological components that humans could not replicate, forcing the team to develop artificial alternatives that could perform the same functions. The results were promising, but required massive amounts of power that current human technology could barely provide. Claire reported that flying alien ships felt like having her mind expanded beyond its normal limits. The neural interfaces allowed her to process information and react to situations faster than any human pilot had ever managed before. But the experience was also overwhelming, requiring intense mental training to avoid psychological damage from the enhanced sensory input. Sam worked with Elena to develop manufacturing processes that could produce human versions of Corvani technology. The aliens had used molecular assembly techniques that were centuries ahead of human capabilities, but the team found ways to achieve similar results using modified human industrial equipment. The process was slow and expensive, but it was their only hope of building defenses before the Zeloth arrived. Nina made disturbing discoveries about what prolonged use of neural interfaces might do to human minds. The technology created permanent changes in brain structure that enhanced cognitive abilities, but also made users increasingly dependent on the artificial systems. She worried that saving humanity from the Zeloth might require transforming humans into something fundamentally different from what they had always been. The most promising development came when the team realized that human creativity and adaptability gave them advantages that the methodical Corvani had never possessed. Where the aliens had built their technology for specific purposes, humans found ways to use the same systems for completely different applications. What had been exploration tools became weapons, and what had been defensive systems became platforms. For aggressive tactics, General Peterson reviewed the progress reports with growing optimism mixed with deep concern. The team was making remarkable advances, but they were also fundamentally changing what it meant to be human in the process. The choice was becoming clear. Humanity could either remain unchanged and face extinction, or transform themselves into something that could fight back against the Zeloth threat. 3 years after the crash, the massive construction facility in orbit around Earth hummed with activity as thousands of workers put the finishing touches on humanity's greatest achievement. The HSV Retribution stretched nearly 3 kilometers, from bow to stern, built using every piece of Corvani technology that human engineers had managed to understand and improve upon. Captain Danny Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the completed warship, feeling the weight of humanity's survival resting on his shoulders. The ship was nothing like the peaceful exploration vessels that the Corvani had built. Where the aliens had designed their ships for long journeys and scientific discovery, humans had created a weapon of war that could bring the fight directly to the Zeloth Dominion. Every system on the Retribution had been modified and enhanced according to human military doctrine, turning defensive technology into tools of aggression and liberation. Claire Johnson had been promoted to flight commander after 3 years of dangerous testing with alien neural interfaces. Her brain had adapted to the technology better than anyone had hoped, allowing her to control the ship's movement with a precision that amazed even the engineers who had built the systems. She could feel the massive vessel respond to her thoughts, as if it were an extension of her own body, dancing through space with an agility that should have been impossible for something so large. Dr. Greg Thompson oversaw the weapons systems from his position in the ship's tactical center. The plasma cannons mounted along the Retribution's hull could punch through any known armor, and the modified energy shields could absorb damage that would vaporize entire city blocks. But the real innovation was in how the weapons were controlled, using human tactical thinking to coordinate attacks in ways that the peaceful Corvani had never imagined. The first test of their creation came sooner than anyone had expected. Range sensors detected ships entering the outer solar system, moving on trajectories that could only belong to the Zeloth Dominion. The enemy had arrived 2 years earlier than the Corvani data had predicted, sending scout forces to evaluate Earth's defenses before the main invasion fleet arrived. General Peterson coordinated the defense from Earth, while Captain Rodriguez prepared his ship for its first real combat mission. The Zeloth scouts were expecting to find a primitive world with no significant technology, not a fully armed warship built using their former enemy's most advanced systems. The element of surprise would only work once, so they had to make it count. The Retribution launched from Earth orbit with a crew of 500 volunteers who had trained for this moment since the project began. Engineer Amy Richardson managed the ship's power systems from the engineering deck, carefully balancing the massive energy requirements of weapons, shields, and propulsion systems. Every crew member understood that they were not just fighting for their own lives, but for the future of their entire species. Claire felt the neural interface activate as they approached the enemy ships, her consciousness expanding to encompass the entire vessel. She could sense the Zeloth scouts ahead of them, their ships moving in the rigid formations that the aliens preferred. The enemy vessels were larger than the Retribution, but built for intimidation rather than actual combat effectiveness, designed to overwhelm primitive species through sheer size rather than superior tactics. The battle began when the Zeloth opened fire with energy weapons that had terrorized countless species across the galaxy. But the modified Corvani shields absorbed the attacks easily, while Claire maneuvered the Retribution through space in patterns that confused and frustrated the Enemy commanders. The human ship moved like a fighter craft despite its massive size, using three-dimensional tactics that the Zeloth had never encountered before. Greg coordinated the return fire, targeting the enemy ship's weak points with precision that the Corvani had never achieved. The plasma cannons tore through Zeloth armor like it was paper, while secondary weapons systems disabled their engines and life support systems. The human approach to warfare was fundamentally different from anything the Dominion had faced, emphasizing speed and aggression over the defensive strategies they were used to fighting against. Amy pushed the ship's power systems beyond their normal operating limits, providing extra energy to weapons and shields when Claire needed to make impossible maneuvers. The human crew worked together with an efficiency that the individualistic Zeloth could not match, coordinating their actions in ways that multiplied their effectiveness far beyond what any single person could achieve alone. The first Zeloth ship died in a ball of fire when Greg's weapons found its power core, but the remaining enemy vessels tried to escape rather than continue the fight. Claire pursued them through the outer solar system, using the ship's superior speed to prevent any of the scouts from reaching the edge of the system where they could send messages back to the main fleet. One by one, the Zeloth ships fell to the Retribution's guns, but Captain Rodriguez allowed a single damaged vessel to escape with news of what had happened. He wanted the Dominion to know that Earth was not the helpless target they had expected, and that humanity possessed technology and tactics that could challenge their expansion for the first time in centuries. The surviving Zeloth ship limped away from the solar system, carrying with it the news that would change everything for the Dominion. For the first time in their long history of conquest, they had encountered a species that could not only resist their attacks but actually destroy their ships in open combat. The humans had turned the Corvani's peaceful technology into weapons of liberation. Dr. Lisa Martinez analyzed the wreckage of the destroyed Zeloth vessels, confirming what the Corvani data had suggested about their cybernetic enhancements. The enemy was strong and difficult to kill, but they were not invincible. Their reliance on technology made them predictable, and their rigid hierarchy made them vulnerable to the kind of chaotic tactics that humans excelled at. Amy discovered that the Zeloth ships used quantum communication systems similar to what the Corvani had developed, which meant that the escape of one scout ship would quickly bring news of the battle to the main invasion fleet. Humanity had perhaps months before a much larger force arrived to investigate what had happened to their scouts. Captain Rodriguez addressed his crew after the battle, praising their performance while warning them that this was only the beginning. The Retribution had proven that humans could fight the Zeloth and win, but defeating a few scout ships was very different from facing the full might of an empire that had conquered half the galaxy. They would need to use the time they had gained to prepare for the much larger battles that were coming. The victory sent shockwaves through both human and alien communities across known space. Species that had given up hope of ever being free from Zeloth rule began to whisper about the humans who had turned their enemies' own weapons against them. For the first time in generations, there was talk of resistance and rebellion against the Dominion's iron grip on the galaxy. Captain Rodriguez stood before the largest gathering of military leaders in human history, representatives from every nation on Earth united by the knowledge that their survival depended on taking the fight to the enemy. The victory against the Zeloth scouts had bought them precious time, but intelligence gathered from the destroyed ships showed that a massive invasion fleet was already being assembled in a star system only 50 light-years away, rather than wait for the Zeloth to bring their full might to Earth. Humanity had made the decision to strike first. The Retribution would lead a fleet of 12 ships, each one built using modified Corvani technology and crewed by volunteers who understood they might never see home again. Their mission was to disrupt Zeloth operations across multiple star systems, buying time for Earth's defenses while inspiring other enslaved species to join the fight. Claire Johnson felt different after months of using the neural interfaces, her mind permanently changed by the connection to alien technology. She could process information faster than any unenhanced human, But the price was a growing sense of disconnection from her old life. The technology was transforming her into something new, and she wondered if she would still be recognizably human by the time the war ended. The fleet's first target was a mining operation in the Kepler system, where the Zealoth had enslaved the entire population of a world called Theron Prime. Intelligence suggested that millions of beings were being worked to death extracting rare metals that the Dominion needed for their expansion. The liberation of even one world would send a powerful message that the Zealoth were not invincible. Dr. Lisa Martinez had joined the mission as the fleet's xenobiologist, responsible for making contact with alien species that might become allies in the fight against the Dominion. Her research had shown that many conquered peoples still maintained secret resistance movements, waiting for any sign that successful rebellion was possible. The arrival of human ships might be the spark needed to ignite a galaxy-wide uprising. Engineer Amy Richardson, now promoted to Admiral Richardson, coordinated the fleet from her position aboard the command ship Liberty. Each vessel in the human force carried weapons and defensive systems that surpassed anything the Zealoth had encountered before, but they were still vastly outnumbered by the enemy forces spread across dozens of star systems. Success would depend on speed, surprise, and the ability to inspire others to join their cause. The journey to Kepler took 3 weeks, using the modified quantum tunnel drives, during which the fleet practiced coordinated attack patterns and studied intelligence gathered from captured Zealoth data cores. The enemy used predictable tactics based on overwhelming force and intimidation, weaknesses that human military doctrine was specifically designed to exploit through mobility and precision strikes. When they arrived at Theron Prime, the human fleet found exactly what they had expected. A world stripped bare of vegetation and natural beauty, its surface covered with massive mining complexes where enslaved beings worked under the constant threat of death. Orbital defense platforms surrounded the planet, but they were designed to prevent escape rather than repel invasion, another example of Zealoth arrogance and overconfidence. The attack began with Claire piloting the Retribution through the orbital, defenses faster than the enemy sensors could track, while the other ships in the fleet used coordinated strikes to disable the weapon platforms. The Zealoth commanders had never faced an enemy that could move so quickly and strike with such precision, and their rigid command structure could not adapt fast enough to counter human tactics. Admiral Richardson coordinated landing operations, while the fleet engaged Zealoth ships in orbit, sending teams of Marines to liberate the slave labor camps and mining facilities. The enslaved aliens, a species called the Theronians, who looked like tall humanoids with blue skin and large eyes, initially could not believe that their captors were actually being defeated by unknown liberators. Dr. Martinez made contact with the Theronian resistance leaders, who had been planning a hopeless uprising that would have resulted in massive casualties. Instead, they found themselves fighting alongside human soldiers who had come specifically to free them from Zealoth rule. The psychological impact was enormous, as beings who had given up hope began to believe that liberation was actually possible. The battle for Theron Prime lasted 6 hours, ending when Claire brought the Retribution into the atmosphere to destroy the main Zealoth command center with a precision strike that left the surrounding slave quarters untouched. The enemy forces either fled or surrendered, leaving behind a world full of newly free beings who could hardly believe what had happened. But the real surprise came when a damaged Corvani ship emerged from hiding in the system's asteroid belt, revealing that some of the original Federation forces had survived the Dominion's conquest. Commander Thek Vor, one of the few Corvani military officers who had escaped the destruction of his home world, made contact with the human fleet and offered to join their cause. The Corvani commander brought with him detailed intelligence about Zealoth operations across multiple star systems, including the locations of major slave processing centers and military bases. More importantly, he carried news that other species had begun their own resistance movements after hearing rumors about the humans who had defeated Zealoth forces in open combat. Admiral Richardson realized that they had stumbled onto something much larger than a simple liberation mission. The galaxy was ready for rebellion, but the various resistance movements needed coordination and support to be effective. The human fleet could provide both, using their superior mobility to link up scattered rebel groups and provide them with weapons and tactical support. Over the following months, the fleet struck at a dozen different targets across 3-star systems, liberating slave camps and destroying Zeloth infrastructure while building a network of allied species willing to fight for their freedom. Each victory brought more allies and more intelligence about enemy operations, creating a snowball effect that the Dominion's rigid hierarchy could not adapt to quickly enough. Claire found herself becoming the symbol of human resistance as news of her piloting skills spread among liberated populations. The neural interfaces had changed her into something beyond normal human limitations, but she embraced her role as a bridge between species that had never worked together before. Her ability to understand and coordinate with alien technology made her invaluable as the rebellion grew. The Zeloth response was predictable but brutal, sending larger fleets to hunt down the human ships while increasing security at their remaining facilities. But their tactics had been designed to intimidate primitive species into submission, not to fight against an enemy that refused to be intimidated and could actually match their technology in battle. Dr. Martinez worked with scientists from multiple liberated species to develop new weapons specifically designed to exploit Zeloth weaknesses. The enemy's cybernetic enhancements made them strong but also vulnerable to certain types of electromagnetic interference that could disable their artificial components. Combined arms tactics using both human and alien technology proved devastatingly effective. The coalition grew stronger with each victory, but Admiral Richardson knew that they were still vastly outnumbered by the full might of the Zeloth Dominion. Intelligence reports suggested that the main invasion fleet bound for Earth had been delayed but not canceled, and eventually the enemy would gather enough forces to crush the rebellion. The final confrontation was coming, and humanity would need every ally they could find. The final battle began in the Zeloth home system, where the Dominion's capital world Zelthos Prime orbited a dying red star like a monument to centuries of conquest and oppression. Admiral Richardson led a fleet of 300 ships from a dozen different species, united by their hatred of the Empire that had enslaved half the galaxy and their faith in the humans who had shown them that victory was possible. Captain Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Retribution, now flagship, of the largest rebellion fleet in galactic history, watching as enemy forces moved to intercept them. The Zeloth had pulled ships from across their empire to defend their home world, creating the most powerful military force ever assembled. But they had never faced an enemy like the coalition arrayed against them, species working together with a unity that their rigid hierarchy could not understand. Claire Johnson felt the neural interface activate for what might be the last time, her consciousness expanding to encompass not just her own ship, but the entire rebel fleet through quantum communication links. She had become something beyond human during the years of war, but she had never lost sight of what they were fighting for: the right of every species to be free from the tyranny that had crushed so many worlds. The Zeloth Defense Fleet moved in perfect formation, their massive dreadnoughts advancing like a wall of metal and energy that had broken countless enemies before. But the coalition forces scattered into smaller groups, using hit-and-run tactics that the enemy commanders could not predict or counter effectively. Where the Dominion relied on overwhelming force, the rebels used speed and coordination to strike at weak points before vanishing into the chaos of battle. Dr. Lisa Martinez coordinated with scientists from the liberated worlds to deploy their secret weapon, electromagnetic pulse devices specifically designed to disable Zeloth cybernetic enhancements. When the pulse waves swept through the enemy fleet, thousands of Dominion soldiers found their artificial limbs and organs failing, leaving them helpless as boarding parties from a dozen different species fought their way through disabled ships. Commander. Thek Vor led the Corvani survivors in a precision strike against the orbital defense platforms protecting Zeltos Prime, his people finally getting their revenge for the destruction of their home world. The peaceful explorers had learned to fight like warriors during their years in exile, and their knowledge of the planet's defenses proved invaluable in breaking through the seemingly impregnable barrier. Engineer Amy Richardson pushed the Retributions, systems beyond all safety limits as Claire maneuvered the massive ship through enemy formations that should have destroyed anything that came within range. The neural interface allowed pilot and ship to move as one entity, dancing through space with an impossible grace that turned the vessel into a weapon of precision rather than just brute force. The battle raged for 18 hours as rebel forces fought their way through layer after layer of Zeloth defenses, each breakthrough costing ships and lives that could never be replaced. But the coalition pressed forward, driven by generations of hatred and the knowledge that this was their only chance to break the cycle of conquest that had dominated the galaxy for so long. The turning point came when Claire brought the Retribution into direct combat with the Dominion flagship, a massive fortress ship that housed the supreme commander of the Zeloth forces. The enemy vessel was 3 times larger than the human ship and armed with weapons that could destroy entire fleets, but it had been designed to fight other capital ships in traditional formations, not to duel with a vessel that moved like a fighter craft. Captain Rodriguez coordinated the final assault while Claire pushed herself and her ship to the absolute limit, the neural interface burning through her nervous system as she demanded performance that no technology was meant to provide. The Retribution's weapons carved through the enemy flagship's armor while its shields absorbed return fire that would have vaporized any other vessel in the fleet. The death of the Supreme Commander sent shockwaves through the Zeloth command structure, as their rigid hierarchy could not adapt to fighting without central coordination. Individual ship captains began making their own decisions, breaking formation and creating the chaos that rebel forces had been waiting for. The disciplined wall of enemy ships dissolved into isolated targets that could be defeated in detail. Admiral Richardson ordered the second phase of the attack as rebel landing forces descended on Zeltos Prime itself, fighting their way through automated defenses to reach the slave processing centers where millions of beings waited for liberation. The symbolic importance of freeing captives on the Dominion's own capital world was enormous, proving that no Zeloth stronghold was beyond the reach of the coalition forces. Dr. Martinez led teams of scientists and medics to help the freed prisoners, many of whom had been held in captivity for so long that they could barely remember their homeworlds. The liberation of Zeltos Prime would send a message across the galaxy that the age of Zeloth dominance was ending, replaced by an alliance of free species working together for mutual protection. Claire felt the neural interface finally overload, as she pushed the Retribution through one last impossible maneuver, bringing the ship's main guns to bear on the Zeloth planetary defense grid. The plasma cannons that had started as peaceful Corvani exploration tools fired with the fury of every enslaved species in the galaxy, carving through enemy installations like instruments of divine justice. The surrender came not from any official command but from individual Zeloth commanders who realized that their cause was hopeless. Ship after ship laid down their arms as the coalition fleet completed its conquest of the enemy capital, ending an empire that had seemed invincible just years before. The beings who had terrorized the galaxy for centuries found themselves at the mercy of the very species they had enslaved. In the aftermath of victory, representatives from dozens of liberated worlds gathered on Zeltos Prime to establish a new galactic government based on cooperation rather than conquest. Earth became the headquarters of the Democratic Federation, with humanity serving as coordinators for an alliance that stretched across hundreds of star systems. Captain Rodriguez visited the memorial built at the crash site in Nevada, where a simple monument honored both the Corvani who had died trying to warn humanity and the humans who had turned that warning into galactic liberation. The wreckage that had once represented the end of hope had become the foundation for a new age of freedom and cooperation between species. Claire Johnson survived the final battle, but was forever changed by her years connected to alien technology, becoming a bridge between human and alien minds in the new Federation. Her sacrifice had been as complete as any soldier who died in combat, trading her humanity for the ability to unite species that had never trusted each other before. The galaxy learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is knock humans down and give them access to your technology. What the Zeloth had seen as another primitive species to be conquered had instead become the catalyst for their own destruction, turning tools of exploration into weapons of liberation and proving that freedom could triumph over tyranny when backed by determination and hope.